Look, it's not good news when anybody loses their job. But this time, I'm going to make an exception when the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader lose theirs in November. After the stimulus, the first order of business was to pass a budget. That budget doubled the debt in 5 years and triples our debt in 10 years. Now the administration sent us a new budget. This one, according to the Congressional Budget Office, says that our debt will be 90% of our entire economy at the end of this budget. It propels spending to new levels, about $4 trillion. It widens our annual deficit to $1.5 trillion. And it proposes, on top of what just happened, another $1.8 trillion in new tax increases. 2.5 years after the recession started, and no new private jobs. Think what these mind-boggling tax increases and mountain of debt are signaling to people who want to expand and create jobs and open businesses. Congress keeps raising the barriers against work and production. That's your answer. At a time when economic growth and job expansion should be Washington's highest priority, and as if the multi-trillion-dollar health care bill were not enough, the progressivist leadership in Congress are now adding insult to injury by promoting this new climate change agenda. Cap and trade. You are an energy state. You know all about this issue. If they can't get it through Congress, they're now saying they're going to do it regulatorily through the Environmental Protection Agency. This bill is a big mistake for many, many reasons. I'll just be very brief about it. It's going to cost people a lot of money. About $1,600 per household is the lowest estimate. And even the experts in the climate area acknowledge it doesn't really produce many environmental benefits to begin with. It will make our economy less competitive. It lowers job creation, and that puts our unsustainable fiscal situation on an even worse path. If you don't believe me, let me quote a key Democratic senator. Under my plan of cap-and-trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Coal-powered power plants, natural gas, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers. So if somebody wants to build a coal-powered power plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted. That was Senator Barack Obama in January 2008 talking about what he would do as president. Don't say the man doesn't keep his promises. Now, congressional leaders are also pushing an unprecedented expansion of the Federal Reserve's regulatory powers over financial institutions under the belief that government must protect people from themselves. This measure will direct federal agents to inspect and at their pleasure object to the wages and compensation which businesses on Main Street as well as Wall Street wish to pay employees. It puts bureaucracies in charge of deciding the type and line of credit which consumers and businesses will have access to when they shop for cars, homes, education, and the expansion of businesses. The Fed has already failed its twofold mission, trying to create jobs, watching prices in the stable dollar. The Fed ought to be relegated toward making sure that our currency is stable and keeping inflation in check. Instead, it's the same leaders who never knew the government mortgage giants were supplying credit for worthless mortgages now want the Fed to regulate what kind of credit that companies can get. If this happens, then the economic recovery will be a much longer time in coming. I want to return briefly to what I refer to as the healthcare Frankenstein. Most Americans understand that government-run healthcare is not free. It's not cheap, and it sure is not compassionate. I think most Americans believe that Congress has really no idea what the public demand for subsidized healthcare will be. They really don't know what it's going to cost. They're correct. When Medicare was created, Congress guessed it would cost about 10% of what it actually cost 25 years later. Heck, Congress couldn't even figure out the cost of the 3-month Clash for Clunkers program, and they underestimated it by a factor of 1 to 9. But I think what unnerved people so much was the drama that brought this creature to life was so unedifying. Part tragedy, part farce. Ethical categories went out the window. Never in history have the deliberations of Congress been subverted on this kind of a scale. The secrecy, the lack of transparency, the half-truths were stunning. Votes called at midnight. 2,000 and 3,000-page bills that members of Congress never read before they had time to read the vote, to vote before they read it. The sordid backroom deals, the Cornhusker kickback, the Gatorade, the federal judgeship dangled for one lawmaker's brother, the $200 billion quote-unquote doctor fix that said shouldn't count as a health care cost, the double-counting deficit, the slaughter rule that simply said, we don't have to vote on this really unpopular bill, we'll simply deem this thing into law, down to the phony executive order, pretending not to fund abortions when the health care bill, which is the supreme law of the land, clearly does. The level of political corruption that was used to buy the votes for this debacle makes all past examples look penny-ante by comparison. It was not a good moment for democracy. The reason I wanted to go through that is because of this. Self-government stands or falls on integrity, not only in those who represent you, but in the enactment of the law itself. This indecency soiled our freedom and embarrassed the democracy that we are trying to promote in other countries. And this may not be the last of it. To enact this kind of a transformative agenda, the leadership employs the Machiavellian saying that the end justifies the means. America was born out of a revolution against that whole idea. Soon it's becoming the new norm. The Constitution and the consent of the people are all that stand between limited and unlimited government power. Zealous ideologues with the best of intentions brush aside the limits on power in order to get whatever they believe is good for the people, no matter what the people believe. Our system of freedom can survive an assault, but it won't survive if people are frightened or angry or asleep at the switch. A great Democrat, Andrew Jackson, once said, "Eternal vigilance by the people is the price of liberty." We can thank our current leaders for at least this. They have awakened the nation to the danger of taking self-government for granted. Congress is not only enacting a social welfare state agenda over the objections of the people, it is failing to address the problems that threaten to engulf our country, principally economic decline and an entitlement-driven debt crisis. The coming election is going to be a referendum. It's going to be a referendum on the current leadership. Either we will give them a mandate that says more of the same, or it will end the abuse of power that puts the American people back on the path toward growth and freedom. So what happens if we actually get Congress back? Well, I would simply say this. We've got to say the spending spree is over, and we are not going to keep ignoring this debt crisis that is coming in this country. One of the issues that I've been working on ever since coming to Congress as the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee is this entitlement crisis we have. I've just got to tell you one basic story. When Jenna and I, when our three kids who are 5, 6, and 8 years old, when they are our age, the current government, this is before health care, cap and trade, must necessarily double in size. For the last 40 years, we have basically said we're going to take 20 cents out of every dollar made in America to pay for the federal government. That's been the cost of Washington for the last 40 years. Well, because of these programs, because of the retirement of baby boomers, because of the cost of health care, by the time our three children are our age, they'll have to take 40 cents out of every dollar just to pay for the federal government. I asked the Congressional Budget Office, well, what will the tax rates on my three kids be when they're my age? I said, well, it's going to take us a little while. We'll crunch that number and get back to you. They said, well, the lowest income tax bracket for lower income Americans, which is now at 10%, that goes up to 25%. The middle income tax brackets that all middle income taxpayers pay, that will go to 63%. And the top tax bracket, which is all the small businesses pay, that goes up to 88%. And then they euphemistically said in the next sentence, you know what, this could have some negative effects on the economy. The point is this. Last year, the Government Accountability Office said that of all our liabilities, the promises government is making to people today, my mother's generation, my generation, our children's generation, $62 trillion. $62 trillion, $38 trillion alone for Medicare, about $20 trillion for Medicaid alone. And this year, the same agency is saying, just from last year to this year, $76 trillion. So what did Congress do? Congress just created 2 brand new health care entitlements on top of the ones that we already cannot afford.